Thank you for joining me today as I address some concerns I had about an article that I've just read. It's just a little write-up about Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago. So I figured I would just express some concerns that I had. I pray these comments strike a chord and raise awareness regarding some areas where the church needs to step up and fill in a lot of the many gaps that have failed the black community. These are areas where we have ministerial opportunities where we can actually get in there and pick up some of the gaps where we've actually failed the black community and not preaching what should have been preached, as far as bringing about healing from the problems that have happened in the past. We can't keep living in the past in unforgiveness. We need to step up and inspire the people to step up, because things are getting worse, not better. So I was reading this article about Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago laying the responsibility for the battlefield that has become their inner city community on the law enforcement. Now, I believe she is on the right track to an extent. But also, she needs to understand that the police can only go so far. They can only go as far as the justice system allows them to go. I mean, you can arrest a fool over and over again, but if the courts let them right back out without showing them better, then you've really accomplished nothing. The police are there to maintain the order, not make order. So when you have people that don't have sense enough to act like they have half a brain and be productive members of society, then no matter how much police presence there is never going to be true order. And why is this? It's because the chaos of wild emotions, ignorance, and lack of anything like personal accountability and discipline will always be eating away at peace and social order. So it's high time we all started demanding better of each other. I'm not referring to better schools, healthcare, more money. I'm talking about taking a stand and demanding better behavior. Ever since the black community turned away from its foundation of faith in our Creator God and embraced black popular culture, black communities countrywide have slipped into rising floodwaters of embracing entertainment at all costs. We have people throwing away their future just to get their kicks right now. We have a culture of men who look at a woman just for what pleasure he can get from her that moment, without the slightest regard for the life that he is leaving her to raise. We have women who've been so utterly deceived into thinking that their worth is valued at a brief semi-emotional encounter for whatever amount, whatever they think that they can get in return, that they have actually devalued themselves to that dollar amount, or that whatever it is that they get in return, the fun, fame, whatever. And then they end up spending a lifetime housing those consequences, blaming the system for their own actions, and demanding services from the government to fund and educate those children produced. It's not the government or the taxpayers' fault or responsibility to take up the slack for people who can't seem to get their thought processes out of their own underpants. And that's not just a black thing, that's all the way across the board thing. That's the social services problem that's gone on in America, where people are being rewarded to just throw your life away and go out and drink and party and have as many kids as you want. and you are eligible. It's your right to have services to pick up the slack because you don't want to grow up and be an adult. Sex was originally intended to be for procreation, and that's within the marriage covenant. Wild sex parties and rampant lustful behavior throughout history has been the undoing of many civilizations, whether it be from disease or total chaos caused by the cave-in of societal structure, coming from rampant population growth exceeding the people actually working every day to pull their own weight in society. If everybody finds their own little niche and does their part consistently, then things fall automatically into a harmony, and we all get along together. One of the biggest enablers of trouble in a community is when people have resources in order to be idle and get into trouble with one another, whether that be the extremely wealthy or the dirt poor. They both end up doing the same kinds of things. The old saying is that idle hands are the devil's workshop, and that is 100% true. Nowhere do you see drama, violence, conflict, substance abuse, and rampant unplanned pregnancies than amongst people who are literally being rewarded for being idle. We have those who believe they have the right to take from others in order to get whatever they want also. And those, once again, are people who are getting what they want, but not putting forth any kind of an effort to earn it. We have a system that's reeling under the pressure to handle a nationwide culture of people of all colors who are chasing after their own unbridled lusts, having children that they're not prepared to raise, and now clinging to abortion as their plane ticket to Tahiti so they can get out of taking full responsibility for their own misbehavior. We can't point the finger at white privilege and say that they have their way laid out for them just because they're a different color. Color doesn't have anything to do with it. The true answer to privilege and the lack thereof is in the God that we profess to serve. Father God set the standard for his privileges that he bestows upon people for their obedience, and the curses that are bestowed upon people for their disobedience. When he brought the children out of Egyptian bondage in Deuteronomy 28. That whole chapter details the things that will happen when you obey and the things that will be the result of your disobedience and turning against his ways. That's where our ministers should have been hammering home the narrative regarding that 40-year journey. There's so many things that you can learn from that journey that would have been a great benefit to the black community all these years. It should have been priority number one, because that would have been God fighting the battle for the people because of him honoring their obedience to his word and his ways. Instead of all of this 30, 40 years of people legislating others to be moral towards them. We have so many looking at the blessings portion of the Word of God and claiming every good thing there. But most won't even look at the curse promised in Deuteronomy 28 that would come upon the lives of those who disobey God's commands. I'm sorry, but when people profess themselves to be children of God and turn away and chase after the wickedness of the adversary to all things good, then the curse is going to fall upon their lives, and the lives of their children, and the lives of their grandchildren, and on and on. It has absolutely nothing to do with the white man, racism, and all the other asinine excuses black Democrat leaders have bedazzled the black community with these past few generations. The absolute fact is that the black community has turned from its godly roots that brought them through the trials and tribulations of our nation's history. Just the same as God heard the cries of the Israelites under Egyptian bondage, God heard those cries of those old Negro spirituals and the hearts of the truly devoted followers. And he stirred up his God-fearing people and moved a nation to go to war against itself and sacrifice myriads of lives to set a people free. And to what thanks? To now have so-called ministers of God pouring salt on old wounds, preaching unforgiveness on pulpits, and stirring up people to show the self-same bigotry and racism that they accuse others of perpetrating against them? We had an important opportunity to witness that had been totally dropped when people neglected to go through the history lesson and pull out the conflict between the children of God's side and those children of the devil. Because that's where this whole issue is. It had nothing to do with black and white, but it was turned into a black and white issue, when in actuality it is the children of the devil against the children of God. That's the fight. That's the war. This is the battle of ages. Good against evil, the kingdom of darkness against the kingdom of light, the haters of God and his people, and those who love the devil and his sinful lusts. This is the hard line of demarcation to see the difference between these two worlds. It takes a close walk with God to even perceive, even a taste of this situation. Instead, those who should have been challenging the black community to proceed forth in righteousness fell to the lure of Freemasonry, money, whoremongering, and ill-gotten gain that they could get from having attention standing on a pulpit and being worshipped by a congregation. Instead of challenging people to walk forth the word in their lives, they stopped teaching the children to love God. They stopped passing on that care and that love and that dedication to the Lord. They fell in religious observance with no dedication to let him lead their path in life. Their children mixed with the children of the world, and they embraced party culture feel-goods. They reduced their personal worth from a beloved children of God down to hot sex on a platter. They bought sexual immorality into their praise. They mixed the holy with the profane. They worshipped singers like Luther Vandross, who, in actuality, when going back into his past, into his background, he isn't even right with the Lord to be singing. He was there, singing, elevating himself, and not God. Because when you really are lifting up the Lord on high, you don't do the kinds of things that he was doing behind the scenes. You can see that all throughout the past music culture of the black community, which actually started in the church, but where church people decided, hey, I'm going to go off and I'm going to do what I want to do because, I'm looking for more for green than elevating the Lord. And that's where we now have a culture of musicians who are immensely talented, but they've turned over to the dark side. We have, for the black community, in every sense of the word, brought the curse upon themselves. There can't be anybody else to blame when you have a culture of people who profess to be Christians and yet decide to turn off and do what they want to do on the sly. And if that statement seems too harsh, too bad. It needs to be said. It's long needed to be said. We've been tiptoeing around the minefield for way too long. Some get mad about saying airing your dirty laundry, but, those same people throw it up and demand the government to foot the responsibility for the consequences of the laundry that they dirtied in the first place. If black lives do matter, then why the hell aren't black mamas teaching their children that the life of their peers matters? Black folk on a daily basis treat each other as though their lives and very existence does not matter at all. Yet when something happens they can pin on the white man and scream racism, then it's time to riot and play the black privilege card. Yes, black privilege. That's become the badge of honor in society, where people can get whatever they think they should have just by calling up old blood and demanding to be remunerated for their trouble. I'm sorry to say, but we've already played the victim for 2+ generations. Each one given a ticket to ride stamp over the old wound, like a band-aid, but with no real healing taking place. In fact, those old wounds have become a profitable endeavor for those who want to ensure a constant underclass of those who have been led to believe that they are victims. All the while, so many black leaders are the only ones basking in those benefits, while the inner city black community lives are like war zones. Even the black entertainment glorifies the very lifestyle that is the thorn in the foot of the black community. The standard used to be as godliness that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the original civil rights movement put forth. That was God's standard. But when that standard, and actually that was God's standard and they prospered by it. Yes, the enemy did assassinate. Yes, he did. He assassinated both white and black men that were good, that were on God's side. But those men were remembered in history, and they set forth a movement that actually made change, that actually sparked the desire for people to look for better, to do better. The problem is that those godly standards were kicked aside by self-love, bow ties, and introducing other gods, raps, and gang culture. And subsequent that rioting in the streets over perceived injustices instead of acting like grown-up adults and addressing their problems and burying the hatchet. We can learn from one another. You don't have to have somebody holding your hand and giving you everything that you want. If you want to do better in life, learn. It's not like we don't have the internet. It's not like there aren't people out there that you can learn how to do something from. Learn a trade. Learn something. Do something. Step out. Do something instead of sitting with your hand held out, waiting for somebody to hand you everything in life. This pity party, poor me. Oh, well, I gotta drink and I gotta drown my sorrows because, poor me, everything just is so bad for me. I don't have a leg to stand on. No, you do have 2 legs to stand on. You have to want to do better. You have to at least try. When the black man fell in love with his own pleasure, the family broke apart. When he broke covenant with God and looked to the world for his meaning he was led astray. And when the black man called upon the moon god, the result was violence. The black community has been misled by its own so-called spiritual leaders into looking at skin color and not at sin, the flesh, and the devil, calling people away from God's prescribed ways of living. If you're living the way God has you set to live, you're not going to be looking at how much you hate or how much somebody else hates you. You're not going to be focusing on what so-and-so has that you don't have. You're not going to be holding grudges against people for things that were done hundreds of years ago. For things that were done decades ago. For things that you never even experienced personally. Looking back at history, you can see that when a people would call upon their Lord, their one true God, He moved mountains. Whole countries went to war to save people. That's for the Jews. That's for the Israelites. That's for the black man in the United States. When a man calls upon his Lord, the Lord is going to move. When black families called upon the one true God, a whole country went to war for their rescue. Yet again, we have our country at the verge of a civil war over abortion, because in America, the lives of her black citizens do matter. Our God stirred up His children among the white community to fight those ungodly whites of old who wanted to see blacks in bondage. And He's done the same thing even now. We have generations of black women who attend churches, and yet those same women, had they been taught the truth of God's word and actually to follow His commands, would have seen themselves with value as a child of God, as opposed to somebody's one-night stand. We were supposed to have been teaching the young ladies that God sees value in them. And if somebody wants to have something to do with them, stand up and realize that if you want to have anything to do with me, you will value me too. And not regard me as something as careless as your toilet. You will treat me with dignity and respect, and court me and make me your wife, and not treat me like a common prostitute. It used to be that the black community had a lower divorce rate than the white community, but the swinging 60s party culture threw open the doors and people ran for the feeling. There are too many people out there that are using the excuse of being born in racial disparity and not having privilege as an excuse to look at the white man with outright envy in their hearts, while at the same time never looking at the effects of the decisions that they made, and considering the fact that those kind of things that they chose to do would have future ramifications that would negatively affect their life. Instead, they rewarded dirtbags with play and maligned and insulted good men, then whined and complained that a good man is hard to find. The defining factor came when black women stopped expecting the black man to be with them and raise their progeny together as a family, and turned to the government as their husband and provider. The government was never meant to be our husband. In fact, the government is actually man's cheap substitute for God. God provides His law. God provides His standards. God provides His prosperity and His protection. But when we turn away from the ways of God and obeying His statutes and obeying and being His people, we then have to fill in those gaps for ourselves. And sadly, so many people turn and expect the government to do that for them. Well, the time has come for people to realize that that doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not effective. And in fact, it causes more trouble than it ever solves. It's time for people to start standing up and taking personal responsibility for their actions and for the actions of their children, and for teaching their children to stand up and be upstanding individuals instead of playing this endless victim scenario over and over and over again and just getting worse and worse and worse. It's time to stand up and be what God intended you to be.